All right, let's dive into love languages. We're tackling Gary Chapman's The Five Love Languages. We're using the audiobook for this deep dive. And by the end of this, you'll be a pro at understanding how to make your relationships even better.
It's interesting how many people just don't feel loved, even if they're in a relationship, even a long one. It's like Chapman says right at the beginning, he was talking to this guy on a plane. This guy had been married and divorced 3 times,
Oh, wow.
and he just couldn't get why love always seemed to fade after the wedding. Like you'd feel it so intensely before getting married, but then afterwards, poof, it was like it just vanished.
Like trying to hold on to smoke?
Yeah, exactly.
Man, that's got to be heartbreaking. But I think a lot of people can relate to that feeling. We put so much energy into finding love, but then keeping that love alive, that's a whole different ballgame.
It really is.
Which is where I think this idea of the love tank comes in. Did you find that concept as helpful as I did?
Oh, absolutely. The love tank, it's such a simple idea, but it's so powerful. It's like we all have this fundamental need to feel loved, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's as basic as needing food or shelter or water.
Hmm.
And just like a car can't run on an empty gas tank.
That's going to sputter and stall.
Exactly. Our relationships, they really struggle when our love tanks are running on empty.
Right, so we've got these love tanks that need filling. But here's the thing, not everyone's tank takes the same kind of fuel.
You got it.
That's where these five love languages come in.
Exactly. Chapman, he identifies these 5 distinct ways that we give and receive love. He calls them languages.
Mm.
And you could think of them as different dialects for expressing love, that universal language.
Okay, I like that.
So we've got words of affirmation, quality time, receiving gifts, acts of service, and physical touch.
All right, so let's break these down one by one because I know when I hear words of affirmation, I think Valentine's Day cards, those cheesy Hallmark sentiments, but I have a feeling it's a little bit more than that.
Oh, for sure. It goes way deeper. We're
Yeah.
talking about expressing appreciation, encouragement and love, but it's through words. Think sincere compliments
Okay.
and then just those spoken words of support. Like, hey, I'm really proud of you. And even just those little thank yous for everyday things. It's amazing how powerful those can be for someone whose primary love language is words of affirmation.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, what about quality time? Is it just about like being in the same room as your partner, or is there something more to it?
It's about truly being present, with your partner, like giving them your full attention. It's not about just sitting next to each other while you're both scrolling on your phones.
Right.
It's about engaging in conversation, activities, or experiences where you're both truly focused on each other.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point because I know my partner and I, we love to cook together. And those moments, we're both in the kitchen, focused on creating something delicious that's quality time for us.
Absolutely. It's about sharing that energy and focus and making sure your partner feels like they're the most important person in the room, even if just for that moment.
Okay, I love that. So, receiving gifts, I'm someone who loves to give gifts, but I always worry about, coming across as too materialistic. Is that what this love language is all about?
Not at all. It's not about just showering your partner with expensive presents. It's about the thoughtfulness behind the gesture. It could be something small and unexpected, like a little something that shows you were thinking about them,
Right.
or maybe a grand gesture for a special occasion. The point is that the gift, it reflects that you understand your partner's likes and interests. It shows you pay attention and want to make them feel special.
So it's less about the actual object and more about the message behind it.
Exactly. It's a tangible reminder that you care.
I love that. Okay, now acts of service. When I hear that one, I think of chore lists.
Oh, I know, right? But it can be about chores. But it's more than that. It's about taking things off your partner's plate, doing something that you know they'd appreciate. It could be making them breakfast in bed, fixing something that's broken, or maybe just running an errand they've been putting off. It's about those little things that say, I want to make your life a little easier.
So it's not just about doing the chore itself, but the thought behind it. Like, I see you, I want to help.
Exactly. For someone whose love language is acts of service, those gestures, they can feel incredibly loving and supportive.
That makes sense. Okay, last but not least, physical touch.
This one, I feel like it sometimes gets a bad rap. Like people think it's just about sex,
Yeah.
but it's more than that, right?
It's so much more than that. It's about a whole spectrum of touch. Holding hands, a back rub, a kiss on the forehead, cuddling on the couch while you're watching a movie. It's about those physical expressions of affection and closeness that make your partner feel safe and loved. I think it's really about recognizing that physical touch, it can be a really powerful way to communicate love and reassurance and all of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the key with all 5 of these love languages is that what fills one person's love tank might leave another person's totally empty.
Right.
We often try to speak our own love language instead of our partner's, and that's where those disconnects happen.
It's like you're trying to have a conversation with someone who speaks a totally different language. You might be saying all the right things, but they're just not understanding you.
You got it.
Yeah.
And in the book, Chapman, he gives these really compelling examples to illustrate how these love languages, how they play out in real life.
Give me a good one.
Oh, well, there's this story about Bill and Betty Joe,
Okay.
and they were having a really tough time in their marriage.
Yeah.
But Bill, he learned that Betty Joe's primary love language was words of affirmation.
Okay.
So he started making an effort to tell her how much he loved her, how much he appreciated her, using his words. And it's amazing, their whole relationship changed.
Really? Just like that.
In which he finally felt seen and valued, really for the first time in years.
So just by speaking her language, he was able to fill her love tank in a way that nothing else had been able to do.
Exactly. And it wasn't about grand gestures, like big fancy declarations. It was those simple, everyday words, I appreciate you, I'm proud of you. Those are the things that made her feel loved.
That's such a good point. Sometimes the smallest gestures really can be the most impactful, especially when you're doing something that speaks directly to your partner's love language. Okay, what other stories stuck out to you?
Well, there's this one about Jim and Janice. And Jim, he figured out that Janice's love language was receiving gifts. So he started doing these small, thoughtful things for her regularly. Like he'd bring her a single rose on his way home from work or pick up her favorite takeout. It wasn't about being extravagant. It was just these little things.
Because for her, it was those little reminders
Not
that he was thinking about her.
exactly. He was saying, I love you, but in a language that she truly understood.
Yeah.
And then there's Mark and Mary. They both spoke the same love language.
Oh, okay. Which one?
Acts of service.
Oh, interesting. So you'd think they'd be a perfect match, right? Speaking the same language?
Right. You'd think so.
Yeah.
But even when couples share the same primary love language, there can still be these little differences in how they like to give and receive it.
I see.
So like Mark, he felt loved when Mary would do things around the house without being asked, like taking out the trash or doing the dishes. But Mary, she felt loved when Mark took on the tasks that she specifically disliked. Things like mowing the lawn or dealing with those pesky household repairs.
So even though they were both speaking acts of service, they had to learn each other's dialect, I guess you could say.
Exactly. It's not just about doing any act of service. It's about doing the right acts of service.
Yeah.
The ones that really speak to your partner's heart.
Right, that makes total sense. So even when you think you're speaking the same language, there's always room for a little bit more understanding. What else comes to mind?
Oh, there's this really powerful story about Don and Jan. Jan needed surgery. And, during her recovery, Don was there by her side constantly, just offering his support and comfort.
Yeah.
Now, Don wasn't really someone who, showered John with gifts or made these big declarations of love, but being there for her like that, it meant the world to her.
So in that moment, when she was vulnerable, his presence was the most valuable gift he could have given her.
Exactly. It was the ultimate expression of love, especially for someone whose primary love language is receiving gifts. That gift of presence, that unwavering support, that was exactly what she needed.
These stories are amazing. They really show how impactful even small gestures can be when they're speaking your partner's love language.
They really do. And what I love about this whole framework is that it gives us a really concrete way to improve our relationships. It's not this vague love thing. It's about understanding these languages and learning how to speak them.
Okay, so how do we do that? Like, practically speaking, how can our listener figure out what their love language is and maybe even more importantly, what their partner's love language is?
Well, Chapman has these really insightful questions in the book.
Okay.
The first one might seem a little counterintuitive, but it's what hurts you the most in a relationship?
Oh, interesting. Why focus on the negative?
Because the opposite of what hurts you the most, that's probably your love language. So, for example, if you're crushed by criticism, your love language is probably words of affirmation.
Okay.
If you feel totally abandoned when your partner is constantly busy, then maybe it's quality time.
I see. So if we crave something and it's not there, it hurts. But flip that hurt around and you've got your love language.
Exactly.
Okay, what are the other questions?
The second one is a little more straightforward. What have you most frequently requested from your partner?
Okay.
That points directly to what would make you feel loved. And then finally, how do you typically express love to your partner? Because we often instinctively show love the way we want to receive
Oh,
it.
that's so true. Like, if I'm always buying my partner little gifts, maybe that's because I love receiving gifts.
Right. So think about what hurts you the most, what you've been asking for, and how you show love. And that should give you a pretty good idea of your own love language.
And then once you know your own, you can start paying attention to your partner.
Exactly. See how they respond to different expressions of love.
Like, what makes them light up?
Yeah, and what leaves them feeling kind of indifferent? And what have they repeatedly asked for?
It's like becoming a detective, looking for clues to figure out their language. And then, once we crack the code, we can start speaking their language more fluently and really make them feel seen, understood, and loved. But even with all this knowledge, sometimes it feels hard to put it into practice, right?
Oh, for sure.
Like, where do you even begin?
Well, one of the most powerful messages in the book is that love isn't just a feeling. It's a choice that we make every single day.
That is so important because I think sometimes we fall into that trap of thinking, well, if I don't feel like doing this, it must not be real love.
Right. But true love, it goes way beyond those fleeting feelings. It's about making the conscious decision to act in loving ways even when you don't necessarily feel like it.
Yeah.
And Chapman, he shares this amazing story about a couple, Brent and Becky. Their marriage was falling apart.
Oh, no.
They were fighting constantly, feeling resentful, and just totally disconnected, like they'd lost that spark.
Yeah.
But then they learned about love languages, and things started to change. They started speaking each other's love languages, even when it felt weird or awkward or unnatural at first.
So they made the choice to fight for their relationship.
Exactly. They could have easily just walked away,
Yeah.
but they decided to try something different. And the result was amazing. Their relationship, it was completely revitalized. It was a total 180.
Wow, that gives me hope. Like, even when it feels like love is lost, it can be found again. You just have to be willing to put in the effort and to speak each other's love language, even when it feels hard.
Exactly. It's about moving beyond those passive feelings
Mm.
and actually taking action. You know, even if a certain love language doesn't come naturally to you, you can still choose to learn it and practice it because you know it's going to make your partner feel loved.
That's such a great message. It's like, even if you're thinking, oh, I'm terrible at giving gifts or words of affirmation just feel so cheesy, you can still make the effort because
Yeah.
you know it's going to make your partner feel good.
Exactly. It's putting their needs before your own comfort zone because love, it's an action. It's not just a feeling.
Wow, that's really powerful. And one of the most challenging examples of this comes from a woman named Anne. She asked this question in the book: is it possible to love someone you actually hate?
Whoa.
Right. That's deep.
Yep.
So what was her story?
Anne was married to this guy named Glenn, and he was emotionally distant and often really unkind to her. She felt completely unloved and she resented him, like a lot.
Ouch, that sounds really painful. It's hard to imagine feeling love towards someone who's treating you that way.
It is. But what Anne did next, it's pretty incredible. She decided to apply this principle of loving your enemies to her marriage.
Oh.
She knew Glenn's primary love language was acts of service, so she started doing things for him, even though in that moment she had zero warm feelings towards him.
So she intentionally spoke his love language even though she felt so much anger toward him.
Exactly. It was radical. It was choosing love even when it felt impossible.
So what happened?
Well, it's amazing. Slowly, Glenn started to respond to Anne's efforts. He became more attentive, more appreciative, even started to express love in ways that actually resonated with Anne.
So by speaking his language, even when she didn't feel any love for him, she actually changed their relationship.
Yes, it really shows the power of love, even in the toughest situations.
That's incredible. Now, I know we're focusing a lot on romantic relationships, but I was thinking these love languages, they apply to other relationships too, right? Like friendships, families, even work relationships.
You're absolutely right. Chapman, he emphasizes that children have love languages too. And understanding how your child feels loved is so important for their emotional well-being.
Because sometimes kids might not be able to say, hey, mom, dad, I need this. But their behavior can show you what their love language is.
Exactly. Like if your child always wants to cuddle or hold your hand, their love language is probably physical touch. A child who just beams when you praise them, probably words of affirmation.
And if your child is always showering you with little gifts and drawings, maybe receiving gifts is how they express their love.
Exactly. And just like in adult relationships, when you speak your child's love language, it can prevent so many emotional issues down the road. It's about filling their love tanks from a young age, so they feel secure and valued.
This is a lot to think about, but I'm already starting to see how understanding these love languages can be a game changer in all our relationships, not just the romantic ones.
It's a powerful tool for sure, for building stronger, more fulfilling connections with everyone in your life.
Okay, so before we wrap up this first part of our deep dive, I want to mention one of my favorite things from the book, the tank check game.
Oh, yes. That's a good one. It's so simple, but so effective. It's a great way for couples to stay connected and make sure their love tanks are full.
Okay, so how do you play?
Well, when you get home at the end of the day, just ask your partner, on a scale of 0 to 10, how's your love tank tonight?
Oh, I like that. It's like an emotional temperature check. And then what?
Then you follow up with, what could I do to help fill it?
I love that. It just opens up the space for honest communication, and it encourages you to actively do something loving instead of assuming you know what your partner needs.
Exactly. It's about making love a daily practice, a choice to nourish each other and support each other.
All right, well, this tank check game is definitely going on my list of must-tries.
Okay.
We'll be back in a moment with part 2 of our deep dive into the 5 love languages. Stay tuned.
See you soon. Okay, so we've talked about the 5 love languages, right? And why they're so important. But have you ever thought about, like, do they change?
Oh, that's a good question. Like, are they set in stone?
Yeah, do they evolve? I mean, life happens, we change as people.
Our relationships change, so it makes sense that maybe our love languages would shift a little bit too.
It's true. Chapman doesn't really get into that in the book,
Yeah.
but I think it's worth considering.
Yeah,
Just thinking about human nature and how we grow.
totally. Like, what feels super loving to you in your 20s when you're carefree and maybe a little bit more selfish might
Yeah.
not be the same thing that feels loving to you in your 40s when you've got a mortgage, a job, kids, all that.
Exactly. Or maybe when you're younger, physical touch is super high on the list. But then as you get older, maybe
Yeah.
that deep connection, quality time, really getting to know someone and being known, that becomes more important.
Right, because your needs change.
They do.
Or think about a couple who's super adventurous. They bonded over like doing exciting things together, quality time. But then life throws them a curveball. Somebody gets sick,
No.
maybe losing a job. And suddenly it's those acts of service supporting each other through that becomes the most powerful expression of love.
You're so right. It just shows you have to keep checking in.
Yeah.
You can't assume you've got your partner all figured out.
Exactly, because what filled their love tank 5 years ago, 10 years ago, might be different now.
It's so true.
Now, speaking of things that change, I love how Chapman emphasizes that love isn't just a feeling.
Yeah.
It's an actual choice, a decision we make every single day.
That really resonated with me too, because it means we're not slaves to our emotions.
Right.
Even when we're frustrated or annoyed, even when we're just plain exhausted, we can still choose to act in a loving way.
I love that analogy he uses about the flower garden. It's like if you want a thriving garden, you can't just plant the seeds and walk away, right?
Yep.
You've got to tend to it, weed out the negativity, you've got to nurture those plants, water them, and that's what we've got to do in relationships too.
Absolutely. It's about consistently putting in the effort, even when it feels hard.
Yeah. And speaking of hard, Chapman tells this story about a woman named Anne.
And
Yeah. And her husband, Glenn, who was emotionally distant, really critical, she felt totally unloved. And she was at the point where she honestly hated him.
wow, that's a tough place to be.
It is, but she had this incredible realization. Instead of focusing on her own pain and resentment, she decided to try something radical. She decided to speak Glenn's love language, even though she didn't feel like it at all.
She chose love, even when it felt impossible. That's powerful.
It is. And she knew Glenn's primary love language was acts of service, so she started doing things for him even though she wasn't feeling any warmth towards him at all.
Yeah.
And the amazing thing is, it actually worked. Over time, Glenn started changing. He became more attentive, more appreciative. Eventually, their relationship completely transformed.
That's incredible. It just shows that even when things are really, really bad, choosing love can have this ripple effect, not just on the other person, but on ourselves too.
It's like that saying, hate begets hate and love begets love. We can choose which cycle we want to perpetuate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And while Chapman, he focuses a lot on romantic relationships, these principles, they apply to so many other areas of our lives. Think about the workplace.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
We spend so much time at work, right? Interacting with colleagues, bosses, And understanding love languages in that context, it can make such a difference.
Totally.
Mhm.
Because if you know how to make your colleagues feel appreciated and valued, you're going to have a much better work environment.
Right. Imagine a workplace where everyone feels seen, understood, and their contributions are truly valued.
Okay, I'm picturing it. Like the person who loves words of affirmation, they get that public shout out for their great idea. And then the acts of service person, they feel appreciated when everybody pitches in to meet that deadline.
Exactly. And that boss who's all about quality time, they make sure to have those one-on-one check-ins. They really listen to their team. That makes such a difference.
Because everybody feels like they belong.
Yes. And when people feel that sense of belonging, that they're truly valued, it leads to higher job satisfaction. People are more productive. It's a win-win for everyone.
So how do we actually apply this in the workplace?
Well, it starts with observation. Pay
Yeah.
attention. Notice how your colleagues respond to different forms of appreciation, like who lights up when they get a handwritten thank you note,
Oh, that's a good one.
or who's always the first one to jump in and help out. Those are clues.
It's like being a love language detective at work.
Exactly. So once you have a sense of their preferred love language,
Right.
you can tailor your interactions to match that.
Mhm.
Offer specific and genuine praise, maybe lend a helping hand, make time for those meaningful conversations, or just find little ways to show your appreciation.
And it doesn't have to be these grand gestures
Okay.
or expensive gifts. It's just about being intentional.
Right. Just making that effort to communicate that you care and that you respect them.
I think it's important to point out, we're talking a lot about these love languages, but they can be misused, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, could someone use this knowledge to manipulate somebody else,
Mhm.
to try to control them?
It's a valid concern. Anytime you're dealing with human emotions, there's potential for misuse.
Yeah.
But you have to remember, love languages, the real ones, they're about genuine care and understanding, not about trying to get something from somebody.
Right. So if your motive is to manipulate, then you've missed the whole point. It's not about using love languages to get someone to do what you want
Exactly. It's not a tool to get ahead.
or a weapon.
Right. It's about building bridges, fostering connection.
So if you're only doing something nice for someone because you expect something in return, well, that's not really speaking their love language. That's a transaction.
You got it. The intention matters. Are you trying to meet their needs because you care about them? Or are you trying to use their love language to get what you want?
That's a big difference.
It is. Love languages, they should be used to make relationships better, not to exploit them.
And I think it's also important to remember that even with the best of intentions, love languages can be misinterpreted. Because what feels loving to one person might not feel loving to someone else, even if it's coming from a good place.
That's so true.
Like, imagine someone who shows their love by giving lavish gifts, but their partner might actually feel suffocated by that, or maybe pressured.
Right. Or someone might express their love through acts of service, but their partner might feel like they're being treated like a child.
Like they're not capable.
Exactly.
Right.
So even with the best intentions, you can miss the mark. And that's why talking to each other is so important. Having those conversations about what feels good and what doesn't. Because ultimately, the most important thing is the intention behind the action and how it's received.
I think that's such a good point because love languages, they're subjective. What feels loving to me might not feel loving to you. And that's okay. We just have to be open to talking about it.
Absolutely. And be willing to adjust our approach, even if it means stepping outside of our comfort zone a little bit.
Now, I'm thinking about how the world is getting smaller, right? We're interacting with people from all sorts of different cultures. I wonder, do love languages play out differently in cross-cultural relationships?
That's such a great question. I mean, obviously, cultural norms can really influence how we see love and how we express it.
Right, because what might seem romantic in one culture might be totally inappropriate in another.
Exactly. Like, public displays of affection, they're totally normal in some cultures.
Yeah.
And in others, they're a big no-no. Or the way you give and receive gifts, that can be really different too.
Yeah.
So in cross-cultural relationships, I think it's super important to be curious. Ask questions. Don't assume you know what your partner means when they express love.
Because it might be totally different from your background.
Right. Be open to learning, to adapting, maybe try new things, step outside your comfort zone a little bit, find ways to express love that are meaningful to your partner, even if they feel a little bit unfamiliar at first.
And of course, communication is key. You've got to talk about these things, be honest about your needs, your expectations,
Yeah.
and be open to your partner's feedback. It's about finding that common ground, that shared language of love, even if you come from different backgrounds.
Sometimes navigating those cultural differences can be tricky, but I think it can also make your relationship even richer, more interesting.
Totally. It's like an opportunity to broaden your understanding of love, to create a relationship that's really unique and special.
Absolutely.
I was thinking Chapman focuses a lot on interpersonal relationships, but these principles, they could even be applied to building community, right?
That's a beautiful thought. I mean, if love languages are about understanding and meeting each other's needs, then yeah, they can definitely be applied beyond our personal relationships.
Right. It's like, what if we all try to speak each other's love languages, not just with our partners or families, but with everyone?
That would be incredible. Imagine a community where acts of kindness and service are just normal, everyday things,
Hmm.
where people feel valued and appreciated for who they are, regardless of their background,
Okay, love that.
and where words of affirmation and encouragement are just, freely given.
Yeah. It's about recognizing that we all need to feel loved and connected. And by speaking each other's love languages, we can create a much more compassionate, supportive world.
Absolutely. It's about shifting that focus from me to we. We're all interconnected. And when we invest in each other's well-being, we're really investing in ourselves too.
So, how would we put this into practice? Like, what does that look like? Using love languages to build community.
Well, we could volunteer our time and talents to organizations that are doing good work,
Okay.
offer words of encouragement to those who are struggling,
Yeah.
do acts of service for our neighbors or people in our community who are in need. We could donate to causes that we care about. We could simply listen to each other's stories, practice random acts of kindness, just to brighten someone's day.
All of those little things, they can really add up. They can make a difference. They create a ripple effect.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we're all part of something bigger than ourselves. And by contributing to the well-being of our community, we're making a better world for everyone, including ourselves.
Now, one thing that Chapman touches on briefly in the book, but I think it's so important, is the role of forgiveness in relationships.
Oh, forgiveness is huge.
It is, because even in the best relationships, we're going to hurt each other sometimes. Intentionally, unintentionally, it happens. And when it does, forgiveness is so essential for healing and moving forward.
You're so right. Because holding on to anger, resentment, that just creates distance. It poisons the relationship. And it makes it almost impossible to speak each other's love languages authentically.
Right, because you're coming from a place of hurt and anger. And forgiveness, it doesn't mean condoning bad behavior.
Right.
It just means letting go of the pain and anger you're carrying around so you can move on.
Chapman, he tells this story about a couple who were really struggling to forgive each other. The husband, he'd had an affair, and his wife, she was understandably devastated. She couldn't even imagine ever forgiving him.
Oh, that's so tough.
It is. But, through counseling and a lot of really hard work, they both came to understand how important forgiveness was. The wife, she realized that holding on to that anger, it was only hurting her. It wasn't allowing her to heal.
It was keeping her stuck.
Exactly. And the husband, he acknowledged the pain he caused. And he was truly remorseful. He really wanted to rebuild the trust and show her how much he loved her.
So they both made a choice to choose love over resentment.
They did. And through honest communication, being empathetic and willing to work through the pain together, they were able to forgive each other and rebuild their relationship. It wasn't easy, but they chose love.
And that's such a powerful reminder that forgiveness, it's not a one-time thing. It's a process.
It takes time.
Effort, and a real commitment from both people. But when you choose to forgive, you open yourself up to the possibility of healing, of reconciliation, and maybe even a deeper love than before.
It really is a gift, not just to the person you're forgiving, but to yourself. You free yourself from that burden.
Now, Chapman focuses a lot on the 5 love languages, but I was thinking personality types, they play a role too, right?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
The way we express and experience love is definitely influenced by our personality.
Right, because if you're introverted versus extroverted, analytical versus emotional, all of those things shape how we communicate and how we connect with the world.
Exactly. Like an introvert might need a lot of alone time to recharge, but an extrovert, they get energized by being around people. So how they experience love is going to be different.
Right. Or someone who's analytical, they might show their love by doing practical things or helping you solve problems.
Yeah,
But someone who's more emotional, they might be super affectionate or express their love through words.
it's true. So understanding your own personality type and your partner's can be really helpful
Yeah.
because it adds this extra layer of nuance to the whole love languages thing.
It's like another piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. And it helps you avoid misunderstandings
Hmm.
because what feels loving to one personality type might not feel loving to another, even if it's meant to be an expression of love.
So, how do we use this knowledge of personality types to make our relationships better?
Well, if you know your partner is super sensitive, for example, you might be more careful about your tone of voice, especially when you're giving feedback or disagreeing with them.
Right. Because you know they're going to take it to heart.
Exactly. Or if your partner is super organized, you might try to be more respectful of their need for order. Don't leave your stuff all over the place.
It's about honoring those differences and
Mhm.
finding ways to connect that work for both of you.
Exactly. And when you do that, it creates this much more harmonious relationship
Mm.
where both partners feel seen, understood, appreciated for who they really are.
Now, I was thinking, when you're speaking each other's love languages, doesn't that naturally make you feel more grateful for your partner, more appreciative?
It really does. When you're putting in the effort to show love in a way that's meaningful to your partner,
Hmm.
you start to notice the things they do for you more.
Yeah, like all those little things they do.
Exactly. Like if your partner's love language is acts of service, and you start making an effort to do things around the house, suddenly you notice all the things they're already doing to keep things running smoothly.
Right.
You start to appreciate those everyday acts of love that you might have been taking for granted before.
Totally. Or if your partner's love language is words of affirmation and you start making an effort to give them compliments and tell them how much you appreciate them, you might start to see all these amazing qualities that you hadn't really focused on before.
Exactly. You see them in a new light. And you feel a deeper sense of gratitude having them in your life, just for who they are.
So it's like by speaking each other's love languages, you actually shift your focus from what's missing in the relationship to what's already there.
Yes. And that can be a game changer because the more you appreciate your partner, the more you want to express your love to them. And the more loved they feel, the more they'll reciprocate.
It's a positive feedback loop.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it can take a relationship that feels kind of empty and make it feel really abundant and fulfilling.
Okay, so we know that even the most loving couples are going to disagree sometimes, have arguments. I wonder, can understanding love languages help us with those moments, those conflicts?
Absolutely. Love languages can be really helpful for resolving conflict in a peaceful, constructive way. It's about using that knowledge to really see things from your partner's point of view and responding in a way that feels supportive, even when you don't agree with them.
So instead of just getting defensive and reacting in the heat of the moment, you can pause and think, okay, how is what I'm saying landing on my partner?
Exactly. And you can adjust your approach accordingly. Like if your partner's love language is quality time and you're having this big argument, you might want to take a break and then come back later and have a calm, loving conversation instead of trying to just win the argument.
Because for them, feeling connected, feeling heard, that's crucial for resolving the issue.
Yes. Or if your partner's love language is words of affirmation, offering them reassurance, validating their feelings, even if you disagree, can help a lot.
It's like saying, look, I don't agree with you on this, but I still love you.
Exactly. And, it's not just about the words you use. It's your tone of voice, your body language.
Right. You can say the right words, but if your tone is harsh or you're rolling your eyes,
It's not going to land well.
exactly.
It's about approaching the conversation with empathy, truly trying to understand their perspective.
Not just trying to win.
Right. Because ultimately you're on the same team.
Now, even though Chapman talks a lot about meeting each other's needs, I think it's also important to talk about boundaries.
Oh, boundaries are huge. They're so important for protecting your own well-being and making sure your relationship is balanced and respectful.
Because sometimes speaking someone's love language can start to feel like a burden if you're not careful. So boundaries are about knowing your limits and communicating them clearly.
Exactly.
Mm,
And you know what? Healthy boundaries, they can actually make you better at expressing love.
really? How so?
Well, think about it. If your partner's love language is quality time and they want to spend every waking moment together, but you're an introvert and you need some alone time,
Yeah.
you have to set a boundary
Yeah.
and say, hey, I love spending time with you, but I also need some time to myself.
Yeah.
That way, when you are together, you can be fully present and enjoy that quality time without feeling resentful or drained.
Right, because you've honored your own needs.
Exactly. Or let's say your partner's love language is acts of service,
Mm.
and they're always asking you to do things for them, but some of those things you're just not comfortable with or you don't have time.
Yeah.
It's perfectly okay to set a boundary and say, I love you and I want to help, but I'm not able to do that right now.
So it's not about rejecting their love language. It's about making sure the relationship is sustainable for both of you.
Exactly. Boundaries, they're not about building walls. They're about creating healthy relationships.
Yeah.
So be willing to compromise, negotiate, find solutions that work for both of you.
Right. Because ultimately, it's about creating a space where love can thrive,
Yeah.
but without sacrificing your own well-being.
Exactly. Now, one thing that really struck me as I was reading the book was how learning and speaking each other's love languages can actually help you grow as a person.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's not just about connection, it's also about personal development.
I see.
Like when you learn about your own love language, you understand your own emotional needs better. And that self-awareness can be really powerful.
It helps you communicate your needs to other people, set those boundaries, and really advocate for yourself.
Exactly. And when you learn about your partner's love language, you're forced to step outside of yourself and see the world through their eyes.
Yeah, it builds empathy.
That does.
Yeah,
And that can be a huge catalyst for growth.
I like that. Because it's challenging you to consider their needs, even if they're totally different from your own.
Right. So for example, let's say your love language is words of affirmation, but your partner's is acts of service.
Okay.
You might have to step outside your comfort zone and express your love through actions, not just words. Maybe you have to learn some new skills or develop some new habits. And that can be a good thing. It helps you grow.
Right, stretches you.
It does. Or maybe your partner's love language is quality time, but you're used to expressing love through gifts. So now you have to learn how to prioritize spending quality time together, even if it means giving up some of your own time or your own interests.
And that can help you be more present, more attentive, which are good qualities to have
Right.
in any relationship, really.
Absolutely. So embracing those challenges, those opportunities for growth that love languages present, it can make you a more well-rounded person, more mature.
Right. And all of those things make for stronger, more fulfilling relationships. Now, I think it's important to acknowledge that speaking each other's love languages, it can feel kind of awkward at first, right? Like you're trying to learn a new dance.
Oh, totally.
It takes practice. It takes patience. I remember when I first learned about acts of service, I was like, ugh, that's so not me. I'm all about words.
Yeah.
But then I realized I really appreciate it when my partner does those little things I hate, like taking out the trash or loading the dishwasher.
Right. It's those little things. Huh?
Exactly. So even if a love language doesn't feel natural to you, you can learn to appreciate it and speak it.
Exactly. It's about being willing to try new things,
Yeah.
to experiment.
Yep.
And the more you practice, the easier it gets.
And sometimes that process of learning and speaking each other's love languages, I think it can even spark creativity in a relationship.
Oh, that's a great point. It's not just about following a formula. It's about using these principles as inspiration.
Right, because when you're consciously thinking about how to speak your partner's love language, it makes you get a little more creative.
You have to think outside the box.
Exactly. Find new ways to show your love. So, for example, if your partner's love language is receiving gifts, maybe you go beyond just buying them stuff. You create a handmade gift. Or you write them a letter. Or plan a special outing that's tailored to their interests.
It's about making it personal.
Exactly. And if your partner's love language is quality time, maybe you find creative ways to make the most of the time you do have together.
Right, like a themed date night or taking a class together.
Or just turning off your phones and really being present with each other.
You got it. It's about keeping that spark alive, finding ways to surprise and delight your partner, and not letting things get too routine.
Right, because you don't want to fall into a rut. You want to keep things exciting. And I think that's what's so cool about love languages. It's not about checking boxes. It's about finding ways to make your partner feel loved and cherished.
And, I think mindfulness is a big part of this, too. It's not just about doing the actions. It's about being present, being intentional.
Right, it's about putting your heart into it.
Exactly.
Oh,
Because
sure.
when you're really trying to speak your partner's love language, you slow down. You pay attention. You're not just going through the motions.
You're not on autopilot.
Right. Like if your partner's love language is physical touch, and you make a point of giving them a hug or a back rub, You might find yourself being more present in that moment, really enjoying the connection,
Eh,
and noticing how they respond.
Or if their love language is quality time and you set aside time for a date night, you might find yourself listening more attentively, putting your phone away, really focusing on what they have to say.
Exactly. So when you approach love languages with intention and mindfulness, those actions, they become more meaningful. They become a true expression of love.
And that's what creates a deeper connection.
It does. Because love languages, they're not about grand gestures. It's those little everyday moments of connection. And when those moments are infused with intention, they can really transform a relationship.
All right, so as we move on to the final part of our deep dive, I want to explore how love languages can help us navigate those tougher parts of relationships, the challenges that we all face.
That's a great idea.
Hmm.
Because while Chapman focuses on healthy relationships, I think these principles can be really helpful when you're dealing with difficult personalities
Hmm.
or even toxic dynamics. So stay tuned. We're going to get into all of that after the break.
All right, we're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into the 5 love languages. We've covered so much ground already, but I'm thinking about those relationships that, well, they're not always smooth sailing, those ones that feel a little bit rocky. Can love languages help us there too?
You know, I think they can. It's interesting because Chapman focuses a lot on healthy relationships in the book, but I think those principles can be really helpful when you're dealing with, a difficult person, maybe even a toxic situation.
Right, because we've all got those people in our lives, right? A boss who's constantly criticizing, a family member who just knows how to push your buttons, that friend who always seems to bring the mood down.
It's true. And it's so easy to just want to avoid those people, to just write them off. But knowing their love language, it can give you a whole new way of seeing them.
Okay, I like that. Because it's not about condoning their behavior, right? It's about maybe finding a little bit of compassion.
Exactly. So instead of just labeling them as difficult, you can start to understand what might be going on underneath, what's driving that
So
behavior.
what's a good example of that?
Okay, let's say you have a coworker who's always complaining, they put other people down, they're just bringing this negative energy to the whole team.
Yeah.
It's draining, right?
Yeah.
But what if you found out that their love language was words of affirmation?
Okay.
You might realize, maybe they're acting out because they feel invisible, like nobody appreciates them.
So their negativity might actually be a way of trying to get attention,
But
trying to get that validation they're craving.
exactly. Now, again, this doesn't excuse their behavior, but it does give you some insight, and it gives you a starting point for figuring out how to respond.
So maybe you try giving them genuine praise for their work. Or if their behavior is just crossing the line, you can set some firm boundaries, but you can still do it in a way that acknowledges their need for appreciation.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between being compassionate and protecting yourself.
That's such a good point. What about those people who are always asking for favors? They take and take, but they never seem to give back.
Oh, I know the type. It can be so exhausting,
Yeah.
and you start to feel resentful.
Yeah, totally. But what if we looked at that through the lens of love
Well,
languages?
it might be illuminating. Like, what if you realized that their primary love language is acts of service? It might help explain why they're constantly asking for help.
So maybe they're not intentionally trying to take advantage. Maybe that's just how they express their need for connection, for support.
Right, but in a way that feels really draining for everyone else. And knowing that can help you respond differently.
So instead of getting caught in that cycle of resentment and frustration, you can use this knowledge to shift the dynamic.
You might offer support in a way that feels good for you. Or you might politely but firmly say no to those requests that are just too much.
It's about recognizing that even difficult people, they have emotional needs. And their behavior, even when it's frustrating, it might just be a reflection of those needs not being met in a healthy way.
Exactly. And sometimes just knowing that can help us to approach those situations with a little more patience, a little more understanding.
Now, one thing that Chapman doesn't really talk about in the book is the role of technology in love languages. We live in a world where we're constantly texting, emailing, video calling. It makes me wonder, does all that digital communication make it harder to speak each other's love languages?
That's a really interesting question. I think it can go both ways. Because for some people, technology can feel like a barrier to real connection. Like a text message can't replace a hug,
Right.
and a video call, it's not the same as being physically present with someone.
I totally agree. There's just something about that in-person connection that you can't replicate through a screen.
But for other people, technology might actually open up new possibilities for expressing love, like sending a thoughtful email, a heartfelt voice message, even putting together a playlist for someone, those things can be really meaningful, especially for people whose love language is words of affirmation or receiving gifts.
Yeah, those are great examples. And for people who are long distance or who have really busy schedules, technology can help them stay connected,
Hmm.
to express their love in a way that they couldn't otherwise.
Exactly. So the key is to be intentional about how we're using technology in our relationships, to recognize that it has both pros and cons.
Right, use it in a way that actually strengthens your connections instead of weakening them.
Exactly. And as we wrap up this deep dive into the five love languages, I want to leave you with a question. Chapman talks about these five primary love languages. But is it possible there are other ways we give and receive love? Ways that maybe aren't as obvious?
Oh, that's an interesting thought. Like, maybe there are more subtle expressions of love that go beyond those five categories.
What if it's about understanding someone's sense of humor? Really getting their jokes, or supporting their passions, even if you don't fully understand them.
Or those little quirks that make your relationship unique. The inside jokes, the shared memories, those unspoken ways you support each other.
Exactly. Maybe every relationship has its own unique love language, a secret code that only the two of you share.
I love that idea. It's about going beyond the formula and really opening your heart to all the different ways that love can show up. So, as you go out into the world, armed with this knowledge of love languages, remember it's not about finding the perfect formula. It's about being curious, being open, and really trying to understand the people you love.
Exactly. And who knows? Maybe you'll even discover some new love languages along the way. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the five love languages.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you. And to our listeners, keep those love tanks full.